Super. Well, great. Great to be here. Thanks for including me. Um, Maybe I'll start. If you go to the next slide, just a little bit introduction to the Commons Project. We're a nonprofit organization that started about 4 years ago, really with the idea of building a sort of nonprofit operating structure to be able to build and operate digital services and platforms sort of for the common good. And we've really been focusing on services to empower individuals to sort of access and manage their and share their health data, primarily health data. We were established initially with support from the Rockefeller Foundation, but really with the idea of building a kind of an entity that could operate common utility services to enable these kinds of things. So if you go to the next slide, our primary focus, I'm going to end up talking about a lot of what we've done in COVID and travel and related to some of the technologies that I know many of the members are involved with. But really kind of zooming out, our broader focus has really been what we think of as sort of person-centered smart health. We believe pretty strongly that that individuals should be able to access and hold and share their health information to be able to inform the care they receive and unlock the incredible potential of sort of next generation digital health services. If we go to the next slide, we sort of believe that good health can't be delivered without good data. That whatever kind of healthcare provider, a doctor you see face to face, a telehealth service, a virtual care, AI apps, that ultimately without information about the individual they're taking care of, they really can't deliver quality care. The challenge has been healthcare information is very fragmented and spread across. If you go to the next slide, the sort of traditional approach for kind of health data sharing has been sort of enterprise to enterprise or institution to institution based data sharing, which ultimately means every organization has to be connected to every other, have agreements in place to share data, and it's really complicated. And I don't think this this model has actually worked particularly effectively, really anywhere. So if you go to the next slide, a much simpler version of this, we call it the sort of bring your own data model, is just give individuals their own information, let them hold it and carry it with them and share. So it's sort of a radically different and we think radically simpler model to solving for this interoperability problem so that people can bring their data and inform the care that they receive. So that's sort of was our key focus, kind of before the pandemic. If you go on to the next slide. What really catalyzed our work, actually, Apple in 2017 had launched Apple Health and Apple Health Records that enables iPhone users to collect, manage, and share their health data. So you can connect Apple Health to your hospital or lab and pull health information down onto your phone. The challenge was it only existed on iPhones. And obviously there are a lot of people in the US and around the world that have Android phones. And so if you go to the next slide, we sort of set out to help fill that void and developed and launched a platform called Common Health, which is really mirrors what Apple has done on iOS for Android devices. Again, allowing individual to connect their phone to all these various sources of health data, and then be able to manage that information and share it. So if you go to the next slide, right now between Apple Health and Common Health are connected to over 800 different data sources, big hospital systems, labs, insurance companies, and others to allow individual again to get access to that information, hold it on their phone, and then share it. If you go to the next slide. So what does that actually look like? This is a screenshot of my Common Health account where I've connected my Common Health account on my phone to hospital, Weill Cornell, to LabCorp, to Quest. I've also pulled in vaccination records from the New York State that adopted a smart health card standard for vaccination records that I'll talk about shortly. And that's all now sitting on my phone. If you go to the next slide, it really mirrors this is my iPhone, my Apple Health account. It really mirrors the same thing where I pulled data onto my Apple Health account and have the same information that you saw in my Common Health on my Android phone on my iPhone. So if you then go to the next slide, what does that mean as I now go to a new doctor, change insurance, move about the healthcare system? That health organization can say, hey, welcome to, my health system. Will you consent to share your information? And I can consent, and Apple works the same way, consent to share that information, and then that information can be used to inform the care. So this is sort of what we were working on pre-COVID. Then COVID happened, and we realized there was a whole new reason that people needed to access and share health information. So if you go to the next slide, in late 2020, we launched a solution called CommonPass in partnership with the World Economic Forum to really, really sort of prove out this model of how people shared health data to enable travel. And CommonPass really helped define the whole category of health passes. What we realized, though, there was a challenge, which is there was never traditionally verifiability built into sort of health data standards. So if you go to the next slide, there was a format called HL7, which is sort of the standard format for interoperable health data, but there was no verifiability built into that health information. So we worked, with a core group of partners, including Apple and Microsoft and others, to help co-develop this standard called Smart Health Cards that enabled us to take a piece of structured health data and put it into a verifiable credential. Initially for COVID vaccination records and lab results, but the standard is now being able to extend to support all sorts of different health data types, all vaccination records, all lab results, health insurance information, and other structured data in a verifiable format. If you go to the next slide, the standard initially took root with a lot of the key stakeholders in the US healthcare ecosystem. So all the health systems and the electronic health record platforms, the pharmacy chains, the technology platforms, but then, and now about 30 states have adopted it, but then Canada adopted it as their national standard, as did Japan and Kenya and Rwanda and Taiwan and others. So it's really emerged, there are others, the EU created a standard, but this has emerged as one of the leading global standards for verifiable health information. Really significantly, and I think relevant to this group, if you go to the next slide, it was also the standard adopted by the mobile platforms. So Apple adopted the standard as the standard for holding a vaccination record, both in Apple Health, but also in Apple Wallet. And then we worked with both Google and Samsung to do the same thing to support this standard as the standard for holding health information on Android phones, including in GPay and in Samsung Pay. So if you go to the next slide, what we then realized is we needed to create the ability to verify these smart health cards. So we launched something called the Smart Health Card Verifier, both an app and an API, which is verifying, is it a valid smart health card and is it from a trusted source? One of the challenges is once it gets into the world of verifiability of health data is this standard is an open standard, which means anyone could create a smart health card QR code. It becomes important to verify, is it a valid smart health card? Has it been tampered with? But also, who is the source? It's important, one should recognize a vaccination record from the state of New York or from a respected health institution like the Mayo Clinic, but not from Paul's random vaccine shop. And so if you go to the next slide, one of the things that we also did as this standard was being adopted is to launch something called the Common Trust Network, which is really this registry of the governments that are issuing these credentials, but also the pharmacies, the health institutions, and we maintain that as a trust framework for the organizations that have adopted the standard and are making available data available to individuals using this standard. So that's sort of what we've done. If you go to the next slide, just sort of kind of summarize the sort of component parts of this ecosystem. You have the sources of data that are in the sort of Common Trust Network registry. There are, people then can carry that information. They can use apps like Common Health or Apple Health. And then, there is the need to be able to then verify the information that is being shared through things like the Smart Health Card Verifier and also a platform called CommonCheck that I'll talk about. Now, in the final few minutes, I want to shift to, kind of go back to the sort of the travel world, because as I think about some of the promise of touchless travel, I know a lot of companies and are involved in this. If we go to the next slide, if one remembers way back to I guess 2019, the sort of the pre-COVID, the antediluvian pre-COVID era, there was a huge amount of work, and I'm sure many of the companies in this forum were involved in this, around sort of touchless and seamless travel. making it easy to check in and not have to get out your passport and so on and so forth. If you go to the next slide, that all of course ground to the halt with COVID, right? COVID, countries shut their borders and they imposed travel restrictions that really shut down travel, but they were kind of overlay restrictions. So the health requirements weren't sort of integrated with sort of the routine travel processes and flows. They were kind of overlay requirements that created chaos and frustration and delay. Now, if you go to the next slide, as we're coming out of the pandemic, I think a lot of countries, I mean, everyone's sort of exhausted and ready to move on, but a lot of countries are saying, well, wait a second, let's be sure that we don't end up in the same mess, if there's another wave, or if there's for the next pandemic. And so we're working with a number of countries to think about how do you actually embed the ability to do sort of health screening, but do it in a way that's integrated with the travel and border crossing flows. So it's kind of integrated into that as a component of that experience, not something that's totally separate. So if you go to the next slide, this is something that ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, IATA, are really championing and encouraging governments to actually kind of embed health screening as a component part of sort of border and travel process flows in general. If you go to the next slide, we published a report recently with the World Travel and Tourism Council on sort of best practices for countries and thinking about how do you get ahead of this for the next time. If you go to the next slide, basically, really the recommendations in the report are, again, allow individuals to basically provide their health information before travel, as well as things like contact tracing information is required, check it against the rules of entry that the governments have, and then provide notice to the traveler before the journey begins, and also notify the airline. So again, as we think about the sort of seamless travel world, like health should be something that's an upstream ingredient to enable that seamless travel experience. So if you go to the next slide, we've worked with a lot of countries. This just is one example, Cayman Islands, where we've embedded what we call this Common Check platform to be able to do that sort of pre-travel verification. If you go to the next slide, it basically gives countries the ability to say, hey, here are the rules that you need to comply with to come to my country. Please provide your health information. You go to the next slide, you can submit be it test results, vaccination records. If you go to the next slide, that's then being checked. We're verifying there are different credential standard types from all around the world. We kind of verify all of them. Go to the next slide. We also, unfortunately, have to deal with paper because some countries like the US have released these very high-tech certificates. If you go to the next slide, what are we then doing in that flow? We're saying, is the document authentic? Is it verifiable? Or if not, at least does it match a known format? Is it from a trusted source? Does it pertain to the same person? And does it satisfy the country's rules? You go to the next slide. So then, back to the flow, we've now verified that the record is legitimate, it satisfies the rules, and go to the next slide. And then basically saying, okay, traveler, now you're kind of okay to enter, and providing that verification or evidence of sort of having satisfied the rules to the traveler. If you go to then, last a couple slides here, I think we can skip that one. I think just to sort of summarize, and again, as we think, and this is sort of the work that we're doing to champion this with governments, is as you think about again how health can get integrated into sort of seamless travel. Again, do it before the travel begins, integrate it with the sort of standard border and kind of travel workflows, make it flexible so it can support all types of credentials. I think one of the things that we learned in this last 2 years is there's the ideal of, wouldn't it be great if everyone had this perfectly digitally verifiable thing, but meanwhile, back in the real world, people are showing up with all sorts of different document types and credentials. Make it flexible so that rules can change, and then have it ready on in advance of the next pandemic. So I guess the final slide. That's really, kind of what we're doing. We're obviously, the last 2 years has been quite a journey, and lots of lessons learned. We're certainly kind of keen to collaborate, and as we think about the potential of NFC to really kind of, verify and make it easy for me to get through the gates on this on the screen, for example. I think, we're very engaged with doing a lot of these sort of upstream sort of standards creation and sort of interoperability enablement, to be able to sort of enable some of these flows. So keen to, hear from and work with organizations involved in this work. My email is on the final slide. It's just paul@thecommonsproject.org. Happy to hear from you and explore opportunities to collaborate.
All right, thanks, Paul. Hey, we have one quick question, and I'm going to ask it real quick. I think I know the answer. So the question from the audience was, with the increase in health data from wearables, do you see any storage concerns with customers storing health data on their devices? I would assume, I'm going to add to this, I assume most of this is in the cloud, but would you have any quick comments about limited storage on devices and the amount of data that they might have?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a great question. I think the way we think about it is, so not all data needs to be stored on a device. What we're actually, one of the things that we're actually working on right now is something called, smart health links, right? So smart health cards are actually with the data literally is contained in the QR code. And, when it's being verified, literally the data is extracted, the vaccination information is actually embedded in that, quite dense QR code. Obviously, there's almost, I mean, there's a very limited amount of data you could put in a QR code, but you can include a link to data that's hosted by the source. So not all data either is going to be in a QR code or even on the phone, but if you want to enable sharing, I can basically effectively share a link saying, hey, here is a link that links back to the data at the source. But to be clear, we're not creating some central storage cloud infrastructure, and neither is Apple, just to be clear. I mean, data sits on the device in the individual's entire control. I mean, but again, the way solve the big data problem is, the data can be stored at the original source, and the thing that is held and passed is really just a link, a pointer back to the source of that larger data set.
Right. All right, great. Paul, great and interesting work, filling obviously a needed gap. Thank you very much for your time today.